Of the movie. Oops.
Well, let me turn this off too. What's up, good people? There we go.
That's what you say.
I thought one other thing we could, with the three of us here too, I mean, one thing we could also talk about a little bit is just kind of how at our sort of rank and file together across the state, we're trying to reach out to, each other and kind of build a
What's up, Joan?
Informal kind of network.
Right.
That's one other thing.
How did you have the meeting with the bylaws amendment?
Oh, it was good. We got to talk about that too.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that was really good. Yesterday, we had our first union meeting of the year, and been working on some bylaws for the last few months. And in our current bylaws, you got to give it to the board at the first meeting of the year. So that went through. It went through real good. The members accepted it. You just got to go through the voting process. So it went real good, real good. I was shocked though, because didn't nobody oppose it. I thought somebody was gonna.
Really, yeah.
Everybody was clapping and cheering, so that was shocking.
Yeah.
So, but I know it's not over with that yet though.
Yeah.
You know our e-board, man, they gonna come out ready to fight.
Yeah.
So, but we ready.
So when we start off, how about talk a little bit about labor and Dr. King
Okay.
connections. What Dr. King was fighting for, that change that happened when he expanded from just civil rights for African Americans to looking at capitalism, its connection to what was going on in the community.
Right.
Okay. And how he talked about changes that were needed. And then from there we can launch to union. Why you feel there needs to be possibly some changes in some of the locals, which will get us to your theme. Okay. Teachers, Teamsters, and teaching.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Right, we got you. Well, you got it. You got it.
Because I'm thinking there about, you've been doing a lot of one-on-one teaching.
Right.
Okay. Why? What is the impact?
Right. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds good too.
All right.
Make sure they can see everybody. Everybody can see y'all.
Yeah, I mean,
There you go. All right, cool. Let's scoot over some more. All right, here we go. What's up, Sherry?
Check out my clothes.
Me.
I hear you. I hear you.
Check.
Did me find some? I didn't get to make it out to LA. I was on there. Always have you.
You are listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia. This is Labor Justice Radio. I'm your host, Charles Clark. Solo tonight. Jim is not with us, but hey, we'll carry on. This evening, we have as guests Richard Hooker from Teamsters Local 623.
Yes, sir.
We have Paul Prescott.
Prescott.
Mm-hmm. Where did I get Cord? Okay. Paul Prescott from Democratic Socialists of America.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm David McMahon.
David McMahon, that's it. How could I forget the McMahon part? Who's also with Democratic Socialists of America. Would also mention that David was also long-term union member. So that's what we have to offer on this 21st day of January 2019. The official recognition of Dr. King by way of a federal holiday, which, by the way, had to be fought for tooth and nail. So, we often hear on Dr. King's birthday, leading up to it, immediately after, and also in February, about Dr. King's speeches. The most prolifically shared is the speech he made in 1963 in Washington, D.C. that has been dubbed I Have a Dream. Of course, during the speech, he spoke about a lot more than that little ending piece. Things like equality for all people. So this evening, we're going to look at or attempt to talk about unions, what unions can do, maybe a little bit about what unions should do, the connection of unions, Dr. King. So, we all know that Dr. King was assassinated while he was in support of a sanitation workers' strike. And that may be the most glaring example of his support of unions. There are a lot of others, but let's get into our conversation here. So who wants to pick up on Dr. King and unions, the philosophy?
I can start.
Oh, yeah.
I think even just starting at the 1963 March on Washington with the famous I Have a Dream speech, what usually is left out is that the name of that march was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
Yes.
And that was organized by A. Philip Randolph, the longtime union leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And a huge theme of that was not just civil rights, but a lot of it was labor focused. And if you look at pictures from that time of the picket signs people were holding, a lot of it talks about full employment and
Yes,
raising the
indeed.
minimum wage. And that march could not have happened with a lot of unions pouring in resources,
Right.
including like United Auto Workers. So a lot is kind of left out that civil rights and labor rights were so closely tied during this period. They really always were. And you could even going back to even in the 50s, Martin Luther King used to come to the Meatpackers Union's annual convention, and they had a strong anti-discrimination program. So I mean, it really was always a big part of his life, and even in just black political life in general, I think there was a broad understanding that, you know, if African Americans are disproportionately working class, then unions may be the most important institution in terms of improving the situation. But I think over time, that kind of connection has been lost when we're talking about
Right.
race and racism.
Right.
Well, I don't know if to say it's been lost is really there, because remember that discrimination within the unions was sort of commonplace. Not in every union. There were a few that worked differently, but there were some unions that had as a part of its constitution the banning of Negroes from their union. Others did it within their initiation ceremonies. But unions like industrial workers of the world were completely open to African American, or actually any working person. And there were other unions that had the same practice. I just wanted to throw that in there, but go ahead. So,
Yeah, and even the CIO unions later,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
it was mixed,
Right.
but many were advanced. But I'll stop there.
I would just say in general, I mean, Dr. King had a really strong critique of race relations in America and capitalism in America, and a strong critique of militarism as well. You know, all three aspects of that. He was a very strong critic of the state at the time. And these are all still things that need to be, the need is still there in those three areas.
yeah, that's true. And the most famous speech that you're talking about took place was delivered at the Riverside Baptist Church. And that's where he really declared his stand
Right.
on the Vietnam War,
Yes.
as well as took on the capitalist system in that speech, among a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
But so, in looking at that, Dr. King's involvement with unions, his call for changes in the societal setup that would work out to benefit all people, not just a few. What is happening in unions now? They've suffered losses like the Janus decision
Right.
that affects public sector workers.
Right.
There's a new stat out from the survey about union membership, and it has now fallen below 10%. Some people would like to attribute that to the Janus decision. Others are like, well, no, the union is like another business.
Right. Oh yeah.
So where do things stand at this juncture?
Well, I think even without the Janus decision, union membership still, you know, is falling because the leaders are not doing what they're in office to do. So you take that along with, you know, you get the contracts that you get, then you couple that with any right to work legislation that's against unions, then that's why you see the decline. A lot of members don't feel as though that a union is necessary. If I'm going to continue to pay you weekly or monthly, and you continue to give me concessions after concession after concession, and you continue to let the company dictate and dominate me, then why am I paying you? So to me, it's not about the janitor's decision, or, you know, that does play a part. I'm not going to say it doesn't, or any right to work. But if you take care of home will take care of you. You don't have to worry about nobody coming in with right to work laws or janitor's decisions. If you do what you're supposed to do at home. And, you know, sadly, unions have failed at the house. So that's why all these things are going on right now.
And I would also just say, even more broadly, I think there's less of a sense that unions are on the cutting edge of the progressive force in society. And I think the way it used to be, even for people if you're not in a union, unions were seen as leaders in fighting on legislation that would benefit all working people. And there was a certain, I think, prestige.
Right.
Now, you know, even now, it's just not just that they're not taking care of members, but I don't think people see them as a force in society that to admire. And I mean, there's a million exceptions for unions, and it's not all unions' fault. You know, we're growing up against the most powerful capitalist state ever, probably. So it's not exactly easy, but you know, it can't let people totally off the hook.
Right.
I would just add to that there's been a decades-long concerted effort to pit workers against each other. On all kinds of matters. But unfortunately, one of the self-inflicted ones that unions have done to themselves, I would say, would be two-tier contracts. And that is, and I mentioned that explicitly with Richard here. It was very damaging to the auto workers, to the point where it actually, you know, Michigan now, you know, is a right to work state, but part of that comes from, so now even within a union, you have union members pitted against each other by that sort of mechanism, and it needs to be corrected.
Right. Just like my brother had just said, we just came off a contract where they introduced another two-tier system for our package car drivers. And, you know, and when they finally implement it, it's going to be driver against driver, you know, and even to the point now, they did this past couple of years, they had this retention bonus for newer members. So if I'm there 4 or 5 years, a guy come off the street, you give him a bonus, he's going to make just as much as me. And I've been here working hard through the cold, the heat, do all the harassment, and he comes in making just as much as me. And as a union, you're supposed to, you know, that's not supposed to happen, because seniority is supposed to mean something. But like you said, you know, when they introduced that, it's member against member, and that's what the company wants. They want you to fight each other, because they know if I'm fighting you and you fighting me, I'm going to win 100% of the time.
Right. It's a shame that that's the state of affairs with some unions. Now, Dr. King was not just an orator, but he was also a teacher. And I think that he went in that direction, realizing that a lot of people had not yet opened their eyes. Have you encountered that in your union work?
Oh yeah, the Teamsters Union, and I hate to say this, the Teamsters Union does not want to educate its members. They don't want to teach them anything, because they know if I'm educated and I know what you're doing, then I can hold you more accountable. We've been working on this bylaw amendment for the last few months, and we presented it, what's today, Sunday? No, Saturday. I said it's Monday. Today's Monday, wow. So we introduced this bylaw amendment at our first meeting on Saturday of the year, and all through the time we was preparing it, we educated our members on what it would do for them and their families. And it was based on transparency during negotiations. And we wanted to teach them, hey, look, you guys have a right to know what's going on with your contract. And that's that was the campaign motto, transparency. You need to know what your dues are paying for. Because what our leaders did this time, It was a brownout. They didn't tell us anything. They let us know anything. These two gentlemen here came out to a lot of our rallies and stood at the gates to help us spread that message of transparency. Because if I know what you're doing, I can hold you more accountable, especially when it's my money.
Yeah.
And that's the key. You're taking my money every week. I need to know what's going on. And for the life of me, I can't understand why, not just in unions, if money is involved, I need to know what's going on with what my money is doing, just off that principle alone.
Right.
And I can maybe offer like a counter example. I mean, I'm in the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers and part of a rank and file caucus within it. But right now in Los Angeles, as I'm sure you know, around 40,000 teachers, counselors, nurses are currently on strike. It's been like a week, and there's no signs they're backing down. But and that was a result of a caucus dissatisfied with the union. They won leadership, and they led this strike. But it's amazing, I mean, how seriously they take education of members and the community. I mean, they have a full political education program about privatization just for parents, about how public schools are being taken over and more charters. And it's amazing. There's some friends of mine who were in LA, and they said, you know, if you talk to any parent, they can give you the, you know, all the talking points about privatization, and that's all about education. And then
Right.
within their own members, I mean, the way, and this is something in 2012 when Chicago had a great strike, they had the same model. Literally, they set up every single work site, every single school has an organizing team, and people are responsible and given leadership roles. You know, so I mean, that means every single member basically is engaged and given a chance to display leadership, and is educated. So, and that just, and I mean, if you've seen videos of those rallies, it's incredible to see.
Right.
30, 40,000, and
Yeah.
it includes, but I mean, that just shows you that's how you build up the power, you know, and you need that education. It can't just be, even if it is a well-intentioned union president, it can't just be on one person, because that's a weak structure.
Yeah, I've seen pictures from LA, and it's impressive.
That really is.
You know, that's truly impressive. But the other thing that it points to for me is how much strength workers have when they join together for a common goal.
Right.
That's the crux of it.
Right.
That's the crux of it.
Right.
You know, there are other forms of, you know, trying to achieve change in this country, in a capitalist society. And but the thing is, if you occupy a park, you can be waited out. If you occupy the shop floor, you know, no money, no profits being made during that time. You know, and so you can create an issue that must be dealt with, and that's kind of forgotten, you know. But I think that this current wave of activity, you know, and you know, maybe it reminds people really what power they do have when we act in concert.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And it's proving extremely, it's really contagious. I mean, last year you had West Virginia popped off seemingly out of nowhere, Arizona, Oklahoma, LA now, and actually in Oakland, there's been wildcat strikes, and there's about to be a formal vote that they expect will pass for a strike. But I think, I mean, so many teachers were all talking about it like, wow, look at what they did. And like all of a sudden, once you get the idea, and even historically, I mean, there's so many examples of when strike waves happen, it's like wildfire, and it just, people catch on, and it's very, very powerful.
Right. It is.
Now, we're talking about a strike within what is considered public sector work. Okay? What about private sector? Because the rate of unionization in the public sector is down to, I forget the figure.
Public sector or private?
Private.
I think it's like 7%.
It's very low, I think.
Very low.
Yeah,
it's low.
Yeah.
6.4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
6.4 seems to come to my mind. But at any rate, who or what would motivate that kind of action in the public sector, and should unions play any part in formulating or pushing that motive or providing some motivation
You mean for the private sector?
for the private sector.
They should. I mean, the last strike that I know, well, historic strike was the '97 UPS strike, and you've seen how that really shook up the world.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But again, we had, there was a great leader in charge of it, and he didn't wait until the last minute. He got his people prepared years in advance because he knew what he was dealing with. Now it's going to be almost impossible. I know for UPS workers to go on strike because, number one, the leadership and the members don't. Number one, they don't vote. They don't use their voice, like we just talked about. It's hard to win anything if you're not working together. If we can't join together, then it's our fault. We can blame the company, we can blame our local leaders or our international leaders as much as we want to, but if we don't come together and use our voice and our power as working class people, then we're never going to get anywhere. We're going to keep complaining. We're going to keep not participating. And guess what? The company and the union, the leaders, the international leaders, they're going to be the ones that still win while we keep losing. So until we get that mindset of, hey, look, I got to get involved, then there won't be another private sector strike like we had in '97. I don't see it.
It's interesting because what you are saying is something that Dr. King also stated or inferred in a lot of his speeches, and that was unity.
Right.
And unity across racial, social lines. Okay. And it should be more evident now because, for working people, because they keep talking about the disappearing middle class.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So if the middle class is disappearing, that must mean either they have ascended into the upper class or they find themselves in the working class.
Yeah.
And one kind of interesting thing on that point, the two sectors at the moment that are the most active union-wise right now, I mean, teachers also the fastest unionizing rate is actually in nursing and healthcare right now.
Yeah.
And both those professions are kind of interesting. I've heard from people in that sector for a long time, it was hard to convince nurses of the need for unions because they had this conception like, oh, well, I'm a professional, I don't need a union. But after a while, it's become just so clear the pressure on them. The reality is you are working class, no matter, doesn't really matter the schooling you have to go through, but like the pressure these hospitals are putting on you. I mean, same thing with teaching. It's kind of this weird occupation where it's like seen as middle class-ish, kind of professional, kind of not. But I mean, the reality in working in a district like Philadelphia, it's really hard to feel, you are this professional. All the pressure put on you, both financially and just working conditions wise.
And nurses and teachers also have something in common in that they are both so strongly rooted in their communities. So they really see what's going on firsthand. And I think that has also kind of informed like where they're coming from. In fact, the last time I saw Richard, we were both at the Hahnemann picket line,
Right.
trying to get help get a contract for the nurses at Hahnemann, and also I think earlier that day at St. Christopher's. And the sticking point was actually staffing levels,
Right.
and this is because they want good outcomes for their patients,
Right.
and that and ironically enough for a hospital, that was where the stalemate was.
And I can speak personal on that. I mean, my wife, she was in the hospital the summer, like the whole summer it seems like, and the nurses, man, they were properly staffed, and all this, you know what I mean? That she never had a want for anything. But just imagine if that's not the case. Your loved one could be put at risk because of inadequate staffing.
Right.
That's a real problem. Real problem.
And in teaching, I mean, class size is a big.
Yeah.
I can't speak for everyone. I mean, I would gladly give up a pay raise for lower class size. I mean, and any teacher knows that if you have less students, especially students with a lot of special needs or, you know, who have gone through a lot of trauma, you know, 35, 40, you cannot give a real quality education. And that's really one of the big demands. And of course that unites, you know, parents, teachers, and students. You know, that's a demand that everyone would want and benefit from.
Interesting. Nurses pushing for nurse to patient, better nurse to patient ratios. Teachers pushing for better teacher to student ratios. The same fight in different arenas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and speaking of nurse to patient ratio, there are bunches of studies that show with a proper nurse patient ratio, the patient outcomes on the positive side are higher than if you have a high nurse to patient ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, one nurse to, I think it's either 6 or 8 patients is considered optimum. But nurses often find themselves with 10 and 12 patients.
Mm.
So the outcome for each patient has a possibility of being lower than optimum. Same thing in education. If you have 30, 40 kids in a classroom, the outcome is going to be that those children will have a less successful outcome than a situation of where there was a teacher to 20.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, different arenas, same fight.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And even, I mean, I don't know details of this, but even in private sector, I mean, something like UPS, whether that, I mean, or even railroad workers, for example, I know a big push is, you know, more people required on a train. I mean, and there's a lot of safety reasons for that, but, you know, because they're trying to cut down crews on railroads, so I think one, basically.
They want to cut the, the brakeman. I think it's the brake. In other words, it ends up that there would be, say, on a freight train, one person.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's the engineer, the guy driving the train. Nobody to move up and down the train to make sure everything is copacetic.
Right.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
It's ever, I mean, this kind of austerity cutting is, you know, it's just going on everywhere. And the whole idea is, you know, we can do more with less.
Right.
Which is inherently.
why the cut.
Save money, save profit. They don't care about, you know what I mean? That's all it is.
Yeah, this is to maximize profit.
Right.
You ramp up as much of a workload as you can on the individual workers, and you know, the people who are doing that don't bear the brunt of wherever the breaking point is. You know, there's so much that goes on, like in the logistics sector, in the warehouse end in particular. And especially for, you know, like, well, even like women's health, for example, in that, you know, miscarriages and things, you know, like just improper treatment, just a level of unnecessary harshness in conditions, you know, because there's such a strong drive to maximize profit, you know, and what's going on, you know, in the last few decades is like, all those gains in productivity that's coming from individual workers are totally disconnected from where their wages are.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know, so soaring productivity, soaring profit, and flat wages, and it can't sustain.
Right.
We have to change that.
And it's funny that you guys mentioned that. I was in a hearing one time with the SORT manager, and he was giving me all this talk about, well, we got to cut back this, got to cut back this, that, and the other. But matter of fact, I even say this. This happened this past Christmas. Talking about saving money. Now, you guys know that Christmas time is UPS's busiest time.
Yep.
So what they did was, my manager told me that, you know, we're not going to need you for the busiest day of the year.
Yeah.
We're not going to need you.
Uh-huh.
I said, okay, that's fine. But if, you know, if I found out that you guys worked, then it's going to be a problem. It's going to have a grievance.
Right.
Because you can't circumvent us out of making more money so you can make more profit, especially when you're violating the contract.
Right.
So guess what? I came in that Monday, found out that about 16 supervisors worked. So I gave him 16 grievances. He had an attitude. I said, no, I told you I was going to do this. You cannot take us out of maximizing our money contractually so you can save some money.
Right.
And I talked to the labor manager. You know what he told me? He said, well, the reason why we did that because we didn't want you guys to go through what the auto workers are going through right now.
Meaning what?
Because they laid off so many people.
Right.
And I'm
So
like,
the
what?
implied
Yeah.
threat,
Yeah, you know, see? And so we still have to sit down with him coming up soon.
Yeah.
You know, it's just bad.
Yeah.
Real bad.
So that's what a supervisor. That was a supervisor telling rank and file. I missed part of what.
Oh, no, what happened was it was the busiest day in the UPS operation. He told us they didn't need us for
Right.
those days. Now I've been there almost 20 years.
Right, right.
Those days we
Right.
always worked.
Right. Yeah.
Always. Like clockwork. You knew you had to work Super Sunday, Super Saturday.
Right.
You knew you had to work. Unless you got some, you know, religious beliefs and, you know, Sunday, people go to church. They come, you know, accommodate certain people. You know, 20 years. I always knew you had to go in. Now all of a sudden now, well, we're not going to need you and the rest of the full-timers. Okay, we can't tell you how to run your company. We can't do that. But you also have a contract. And you have to follow it. So you can't circumvent us out of the work
Right.
and have the supervisors work.
Right.
And I told him before I left that Wednesday, I said, hey, listen, if I found out that you guys work, this is what I'm going to do. So when I found out, I did it. Then they had an attitude. Now they're going to have to pay us for sitting at home when we could have worked.
Right.
Right. Right. Once again, trying to protect or increase
Right.
that bottom line.
Mhm.
And like you said, do it on the backs of the workers.
Right.
Paul, you mentioned that you were a member of a caucus within the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. Can you give us some idea of why that caucus formed
Right.
in the first place?
Right. And yeah, and it formed before I started teaching, but yeah, I can go into the reasons. You know, I mean, like many places in the country, the school district of Philadelphia, I mean, it's been declining year after year, decade after decade for so long. And especially for teachers, I mean, it's all encompassing. Class sizes getting bigger, buildings literally crumbling. I think I mentioned on the last show, but a school in South Philly, the roof collapsed.
Right.
One of the first few weeks of school. We had all these half days because it was so hot and there's no air conditioning. So all these sort of things. You know, the workload in terms of just bureaucratic paperwork that is really disconnected from real teaching, cutting counselors, cutting nurses. So, I mean, it's been on this downward slide for so long. And, I mean, not only is like we're being defeated, but it's like there's not much of a real concerted fight back. And kind of like what Richard's been saying for so long, you know, union leadership has not really been really trying to educate members and really organize them. And again, I'm not saying it's easy, but there's so many things that we a lot of teachers saw could be done in the union, that it isn't rocket science and isn't impossible, that are not being done. And so, people decided we need to have a caucus with a different perspective that, is about organizing the membership, finding campaigns that we can win on, that we're going to fight and organize people on, as much democracy as possible. And also this question of making a point to ally with the broader community. Because, and this is something they're trying to do with public sector workers is, well, the average person, your taxes pay our salary, so you should be mad at us, and you should want us to not have a union, have a lower wage. But again, there's a connection that can be tapped between teachers and the community. So, but again, the union has to be in the mindset to do it and put in the resources, which is not currently happening. So, over the years, there's been different smaller fights we waged. We're currently in a campaign around our building conditions, especially removing lead and asbestos, and having a real program for that, which is a huge problem in many schools. In the past, we successfully organized certain schools to fight off becoming charter schools, where it was kind of put to a vote to the community, and they organized to keep it public. We also recently had a victory. For a long time, many nurses were cut from most schools, and we kind of got that back instated as mandatory, having at least one nurse in every school. And we were inspired back in 2012, like I mentioned before, the Chicago Teachers Union went on strike. And again, that just like LA, that would not have happened if a caucus didn't get together. They eventually ran for leadership and won, and then they deployed the resources of the union to run that strike. And that inspired many caucuses across the country. And like LA was one that came after them and got in charge of the union. And we sort of were inspired by that. And a lot of these strikes happening now with teachers is like part of, I would say, like a cycle opened up by Chicago. And it's sort of like the same strategy of a caucus with a different vision, organizing members to gain support, winning an election, and taking it to the next level.
Okay. And Richard, within the Teamsters, was there one or two caucuses? I forget.
They have a TMBC, that's Teamsters for National Black Caucus. They have a Hispanic caucus. They have a women's caucus, and I think those might be the major three. I won't say only three, but the major three within the Teamsters.
What about there's Teamsters for Democratic Union,
Right.
and there's one other. Oh man, can't think of the name of it. But they're sort of along the line.
Oh, Teamsters United?
Teamsters United.
Okay, I
Yeah,
got you. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Teamsters for Democratic Union, Teamsters United are pushing, as I understand it, are pushing for elected positions
Right.
within the Teamsters.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's along the lines of what Paul was saying about what's happening with Philadelphia Federation of Teachers and what happened in Los Angeles.
Right.
Also, before that in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And West Virginia.
Yeah. By the way,
West
yeah.
Virginia.
I mean, the West Virginia strike happened before there was any caucus, but they now did form one because, the task now is to keep that energy going and have a plan going forward.
Right, right. So, there would seem to be in certain sectors, how should I say it, a rising up of workers.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Now, I introduced David and Paul as members of Democratic Socialists of America. And in the light of looking at changes that have either been made or there's organizing around to hopefully make changes become a reality. It seems that a lot of the leaders of these changes have sort of been running their campaigns in a vein that some might call socialist.
Which Dr. King claimed that label as well,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah. I was just going to point out something with Paul's comment about, I mean, with the West Virginia teachers, although there wasn't a caucus per se, there were DSA people who were involved in getting that particular strike up and running. And also heavily involved in out in Los Angeles now, also coming up very soon in Oakland, and there's a lot of DSA involvement in these. And I would say in Philadelphia, what DSA is trying to get is just all of us at the level where we're at in our unions, we're all beginning to just kind of talk to each other, meet up, and just kind of like see, you know, where we're all at, you know, take stock of where our position's at, you know, who's got the real strong organizing ability, how could they teach the rest of us who are on a learning curve. And I think that's kind of a little bit where our place is right now in the labor branch in Philly.
That sounds interesting and possibly promising to get that kind of training and organizing. It would seem, just as a little aside, that unionism is sort of on a path moving back to its beginning in 1920 and the 1930s.
I would agree.
Okay. So it's sort of a cycle that is happening. Now, that begs the question, if it's moving back towards, or what was seen in the 1920s and 30s, and we look at what the scene is today, what is there to, let's say, help prevent if this turning of the cycle is successful? What is there in place to help prevent it going back?
Right.
Never let the Taft-Hartley Act happen again.
Why? Why do you say that?
What it did, it defanged the unions, you know, and particularly in their abilities to strike in certain sectors and things like that. It really reduced like the actual heart of the matter, which is like work stoppages, you know, and you know just you know allowed for there to be right to work, you know,
Right.
states and things like that. So there's a whole constellation of pushback in you know post World War II, you know, in the Taft-Hartley Act, and then followed by basically, you know, a big purge of the left out of unions, and these, you know, in so many respects were the real driving force in creating unions, especially like in the CIO in particular, you know, the industrial unions versus say like the trade unions, which is more like the AFL area.
And one thing I might also say, well, first I guess I'll say I think the tide is turning back, but we're still nowhere near, you know, any
Right.
consolidation of where we need to be.
Right.
But even, you know, if this does accelerate, I think this also needs a political expression electorally too. And that's a kind of another tricky thing. But I mean, I think also if you're talking about post-war World War II, how it started to unravel, you know, United States is unique in that we do not have a Labor Party or a Socialist Party, you know, and many places have at least one of them or both. So labor truly does not have real political
Right.
expression. You know, and sure, it's been allied with the Democratic Party, but look how that has been turning out. And it's really only getting
Right,
worse. So,
right.
well, I mean, there's a lot I could say about it, but that's one thing that excited me about Bernie Sanders' campaign. He could be seen as a clear ally, but that's just one person. So there's no easy answer to this in terms of what we do, but I think labor is going to face, I mean, they face a real choice. So we obviously can't say create a Labor Party now out of nowhere. But you know, when it comes up to candidates like a Bernie Sanders, you know, someone with his program versus what we've seen from most Democrats, whether it's Hillary Clinton and Obama or whoever else, you know, I just can't see why you would not make the choice for who has the clear pro-labor program. So I think, you know, union officials really have to think about who are we allying with politically, because this helps, again, to consolidate our gains legislatively is also important. And, you know, thinking, and also, I mean, this should be a thing that more members are discussing in the union who we endorse. It should not be a rubber stamp, but, you know, people need to think more carefully, who are we endorsing and why?
And I think also, so we won't keep repeating the cycle, I think the leadership needs to be innovative. Can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, because people change, things change, companies change. And I hate to say it, you know, you can't, like, for the company I work for, they're not only dominating us in the contracts, but they're beating us socially and psychologically, because, you know, when I first started, all the managers and supervisors, they all look the same. I'm not talking about color. I'm talking about the way they dressed, the way they acted. They didn't talk to none of the hourlies. Now, it's totally different. You can't tell one from the other. And I think they did that in response to the 97 strike. Because before, you could tell the difference. You could tell the difference. I know who I'm fighting against now. Now, you can't tell. Especially when you throw in the collusion with the leadership, it's a mess. So I'm fighting the union, I'm fighting the company, but the company looks more like me than my own union does. So how do I respond with that?
Right.
You know, you gotta keep changing, just like the company. When they change, you gotta change. One of our most senior members told me, and I never forget this. She said, while the company was changing and becoming more, you know, strict and dominant is more, the union stayed the same. They didn't put up a fight. They didn't educate the members, and they still don't. That's why we have less education and less transparency, because the leadership has not changed.
Okay. This is an interesting conversation. And looking at the political side of things, do you think it's enough to make changes or make inroads at the national level? Or should it be the state level? Where do you see the strongest political impact?
Well, I mean, I'll start, then we'll see where we go. But
I'll chime in.
yeah,
Sure.
I mean, of course, this is not I don't think it should be looked at as an either-or situation, but I think the reality in certain places. So, I mean, there's many situations where a president, let's say we did somehow elect a, you know, left-wing pro-labor president, you know, they don't have allies in Congress, you know, they'll be, you know, stifled in what they can do. And, I mean, it seems a lot, the state level races seem extremely important, especially, you know, taking like Philadelphia teachers, for example. What makes this complicated is that a lot of our funding for what we want and are demanding needs to come at the state level. It cannot primarily come at the city level. There are things that can be done at the city level for sure, but it is tied to the state. And if in the state, you know, the legislator is, you know, dead set on cutting and austerity, we can't move very far. So I think at least on the state level, you know, these things coming up are really important.
Yeah, I would just say, excuse me, just across the board. I mean, at all levels, but I think really like beginning at the state level, because states can so directly undo what happens at local levels, that a lot of the long-term challenges really happen, I think, at the state level, and then that, and as Paul was saying, at the national level, you would need a really, we would need something, a really worker-aligned party to
Right.
be also pushing for the things that we're talking about. Because there will be serious pushback to these issues. Not to get way too off topic, but I mean, well, I'll do it as briefly as I can. I mean, Brazil is an example of where you had Lula da Silva, who just like lifted so many people out of poverty at no real extreme cost to the ruling class in Brazil, and yet here we are, him imprisoned, and a fascist government installed, and capital is just flowing into the country now, and and undoing all that work. So there is potential for anything that we accomplish to build into in this all into a really structural way where it is really robust and stays put, and that requires a political party that is really aligned with workers.
Right, I agree. I'm not a politician, and so, but I do agree. It has to start from the local level and then build its way up until you get to that national level where you can get help that way. But I agree. It does have to start at the local level, the state level.
Okay.
And just one more thing, kind of related to David. I mean, one thing, again, that was interesting with Bernie's run is he also, this idea like, we need a political revolution. And really what he was saying is that this is not just about me, elect me, go in there, I'll do everything. Like, everything I do needs to be supported by a social movement.
Yes.
And, I mean, really think about it, that's really rare in American politics. Any politician is going to say, I need a mass movement behind me, also keeping me accountable. But I think that's the way it would have to be, to back up, again, these things that are going to threaten very powerful, wealthy people.
Yeah, I mean, it's like just like with unions. I mean, they had to be fought for to be created, and they had to be fought for to be kept. And unfortunately, it slipped, and we have to reclaim the momentum again.
I agree. And Paul, yes, Bernie did say that, okay, that he would need a movement. But I'll take you back to the previous federal administration, President Obama. Somewhere in the very early part, I think it was while he was campaigning, and he was talking about what he would like to do. He mentioned on a few occasions, maybe several, that something to the effect, you're going to have to make me do it. Which was the same, which to me is the same thing as Bernie saying, I need a mass movement behind me for me to accomplish this. I think President Obama was saying the same thing, but people didn't hear it.
I would think that there's a little more clarity in saying, though, I do need a mass movement, because really, massive action, massive collective
Right.
action is the key to this stuff. And to be explicit about it,
Right.
I think is really clarifying.
And also say, this might be a little controversial, but I think once he got into his presidency, what he was offering people was not something people would necessarily be that inspired to fight for. And what I'm really thinking about is those first 2 years, and again, of course you can't change the whole country in 2 years, but the first 2 years where the Democrats had Congress and they had a president, they did not put forward, I think, anything bold to really inspire people. And I think he had a clear mandate to do that after the economic crisis. And I think that could partly explain why the 2010 midterms voter turnout was so low, and they lost that hold. You know, he didn't really put out something that people could rally around.
And I submit that it is not necessarily up to the leader to put something out. It's the people with the responsibility to put something forward. In other words, say, hey, we need this, and this is what we're pushing for. Well, listen, that's all the time we have.
Only even 2 hours.
Yeah, I know.
Well, thanks for having
They went about fast.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having us.
Okay, and thank you for your time. You have been listening to Labor Justice Radio. Talk with you next week. And until then, don't drink the Kool-Aid.
I hear you.
And we were just getting warmed up.
Yeah, we were. All right, good people. We got our brothers here. We're going to get ready to sign off.
All right.
Peace out. 623 Lives Matter. We got
IATSE 52 in the house.
Philadelphia Federation of Teachers and Caucus of Working Educators.
y'all guys know, man. I know y'all tired of seeing me, but Richard Hooker, 623 Lives Matter. Don't forget, it ain't over. It just began.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid, right. Absolutely.
I'll be right